Hello, everyone. I'm Keith the Stone with the Center for Hellenic Studies, and I'm here as usual with Greg and Janet and Elan, and Sarah, who's usually here, is out of the office this time, but she'll be back soon. We're here for another iteration of HeroesX. This is the 16th run of this so far seasonally recurring MOOC, this online learning experience. And everyone ends with Socrates looking forward to the resumption of dialogue, in his case, after his death. He hopes to talk with heroes, but we're here after summer break, ready to begin again in the fall. So good to see you all in this context again. And Greg, would you like to say anything to welcome the participants to this iteration?
Well, every iteration for me is a novelty, and reading the kind of verbal art that we're going to be reading is really new each time you try it. And even for me, and I've been trying it many times, it's a novelty, it's something new, it's something fresh. And it is a remarkably enlivening experience, I think. It's not easy. I think especially if you've never read Homeric poetry before, and that's how we start, there are challenges. And my encouragement boils down to this one piece of advice is when things get hard in your reading, just keep going, because the words themselves, even in translation, will help you sustain your interest. And it's going to be more than interest. I think it'll be a real engagement with life and death issues, which is a way of engaging with life itself, of course.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. All right, well, let's begin the discussion officially with our one discussion question. Greg, this is your question. In the story of Heracles as retold by Agamemnon in the Iliad, it seemed as if life is unfair to this hero. And certainly the goddess Hera was unfair to him. But this unfairness makes him a hero. Why is that? So what are folks saying about this on the discussion board?
Mm-hmm. Yes, a few participants are talking about marital harmony, and they are wondering if it affects or it is associated with seasonality, because Hera and Zeus do not really know marital harmony. And then again, for Achilles, we have Peleus, Achilles' father, and Thetis. They don't know marital harmony either, and so on and so on. So
yes. Well, the more I think about Iliad 19, the more I've come to see that the world of myth, as inhabited by Zeus and Hera and all the heroes, not to mention going back to the gods, the whole Olympian order, in the world of myth, which is supposed to be way back when, things are dysfunctional. But I would say that in the world of ritual, and by ritual, I simply mean pattern thinking within your social group, thinking about important things that have to do with life in your own time. In the world of myth, Zeus and Hera, I think, are perfectly harmonious, and everybody expects them to be harmonious. And the gods are harmonious. Everything is harmonious. Up there, that is. Down here, no, no. And I think the key is that amazing moment in the story, or as I like to say, the myth, is retold by Agamemnon, not one of the most likable heroes that we'll ever meet, is that Ate which is the personification, the superhuman personification of things going badly, of things being not harmonious. She, let's call her a goddess, is thrown out of Olympus, which means, hello, in today's world, the gods are harmonious, everything's fine. When ate, which is a word that means derangement, so this goddess is the personification of things going badly. When ate is thrown out of Olympus, thrown down from the heavens, guess where she lands? Well, she doesn't even land. She just hovers in our world, inflicting all sorts of suffering and just feelings of things going badly. So for me, the relationship of myth and ritual is all important, because to me, myth is a part of ritual, and myth can only be understood in terms of how myth is retold in ritual context. And by ritual context, I simply mean programmatic ways for society to keep checking up on itself. And Zeus and Hera are perfectly harmonious. And if we see evidence for how people worshipped Hera, they really liked her. They were afraid of her, but they really liked her. Okay, there's one thing that can go wrong with the gods, but it's not their fault, is when we pray to them, we want this, we want that, and sometimes they just say no. And the question is, are we going to blame them? Well, yes, often, but that still doesn't affect, I think, the worldview of 5th century BCE Greeks. And I like to think of that era of Greek civilization, because that's when we really start getting historical evidence about how people reacted to the performance of Homeric poetry. So I love the worrying of our participants about lack of harmony. Oh, do I agree? But don't worry, participants. If you were a Greek in the 5th century, you would be pretty well assured that everything's okay in your own life and times, as far as the gods are concerned. With us, we have a lot of worrying to do.
I really like, Greg, how you said, or I think it's a very valuable insight for people who are just coming to this material, that this is the view, as you said, of 5th century Greeks, maybe even in Athens, you said, I forget, but much of our material comes through Athens.
I could have said, dear Keith,
and,
Athens, but I'm so glad you did.
I think it's a temptation for readers to extrapolate from what they're reading in these works of great literature as they are to us, not verbal art, not performed verbal art, to extrapolate to all of the ancient Greeks or to all of humanity. But we should remember that it comes out of a very specific context. It's been shaped over many, many hundreds of years, but really comes to a point in a certain context.
I so agree. And I should quickly say that although I admire so much the verbal art that goes into something like the Homeric Iliad and the Homeric Odyssey, the world of the reception of this beautiful verbal art, and I think we can really start zeroing in on how 5th century Greek-speaking people in the city-state of Athens, how they were receiving this verbal art, because that's a very important historical reality. I quite agree with you. The Athenians of the 5th century aren't necessarily representative of all humanity, hardly. But I would say that their myth ritual system is typical of traditional societies. May I put it another way, pre-modern societies. And I'm not trying to idealize the ancient world. They accepted as a fact of life things that I think non-harmonious things that you and I don't accept, like war. I think they just accepted it as a fact of life. I don't think many people even dreamed of a world where there is no war, where there is no death or or wounding or suffering in general because of war. That was just a fact of life. Now, do I subscribe to that? No. I'm an outsider looking in. But I would say that when I talk about myth and ritual, that's something that most traditional societies in the ancient world, and many traditional societies even today in our post-ancient world, are still living by, shall we say.
Many participants focused on the suffering, as you mentioned. Through suffering, they get a price, and this price is a compensation. Is this a pathway to become a hero? And is this compensation given by the gods or by the community? And if this unfairness you mentioned, is the unfairness coming from the community treated how the hero? So there are mixed questions
Yes.
and somebody also mentioned if a mortal achieves immortality, is it unfair to the rest of the mortals?
Well, when it comes to what's fair and what's not fair, there is a mix of agency, isn't there? Is that when we're reading the Homeric Iliad, for example, sometimes we just have to react. No, fair. Athena is tipping the scale in favor of Achilles and to the disadvantage of Hector. Of course, he's going to lose. But because many people, I think, today think of ideas in their own upbringing about, for example, important concepts like free will. I think it's almost healthier not to think in terms of divine will versus free will, but to think in terms of the workings of the cosmos, which in the long run is orderly, but can be very disorderly, very messy in any given situation that we mortals experience. So that's our mortal condition, is that we get to see things getting messed up. And I come back to how Ate was banished from the heavenly realms, but we earthlings, we suffer. And then the question is, do gods suffer for us? And yes, they do. They can be very compassionate. So what's fair? What's unfair? I would say even 5th century Athenians would say life is unfair, and sometimes the just will never get justice in their own lifetime. And certainly we'll see many situations where heroes never achieve a sense of justice in their own lifetimes, and where they have to go to their graves feeling very violated, with all sorts of unfinished business, I like to say. Life is unfinished business. That's why we're reading this. We're trying to grapple with it. It's a struggle.
Well, let's go to the hour 2 discussion question, though I know that we could talk about any one of these questions actually for quite a long time. But let's just move ahead. Here's the question. In scroll 1 of the Homeric Iliad, at the very beginning of the narration, the master narrator invokes a goddess who is a muse. In the ancient world, this muse was generally understood to be Calliope. This Calliope, myth has it, was the mother of Orpheus, a singer who was thought to predate Homer. So why do you think that the master narrator of the Iliad invokes this one muse in scroll 1, and not the many muses who are invoked later in scroll 2? In shaping your answer to this question, consider the heroic world that is narrated by Homer, who was generally understood to be the master narrator of the Iliad. One muse, many muses.
This is
What
a
are
tough one.
folks?
It's tough. A tough question. And here we have these tough questions thrown at our participants. We're struggling, but for a very good cause.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, several participants agree that Calliope is the muse of epic poetry for total recall of the macro narrative. And it speaks to the responsibility of the narrator of the epic to have total recall from the beginning and signal the spectator, to turn on the audio and visual. So
Yes. Beautiful formulation. We should award a laurel wreath to that participant. Yeah, and here's something else. Calliope, which means that it's a speaking name, and the name means she who has a beautiful voice, is the muse of kings. We know from another masterpiece of verbal art, which we're not going to go into so deeply, and that's the Hesiodic theogony. The telling about the generating of the divine order, and there we're told explicitly that Calliope, if you want to start thinking of 9 muses, she is the one muse who is the muse of kings, and her medium is the medium that we're reading, the Iliad, and the medium that we'll be reading after this, which is the Odyssey, which is epic, and epic is meant primarily for kings, I'm sorry to say. Again, am I a royalist? No. And interestingly, we won't go into this, but there is a very interesting kind of storytelling tradition. I prefer to say myth making because story makes it sound too free associative, and myths are not free association. They are a society's ritualized way of talking about the cosmos, about the order and sometimes disorders that happen in the cosmos. So if you look at it that way, then this kind of myth making that I want to tell you about very, very briefly, and we won't get to read much of this, is called Life of Homer traditions, and it's where people in communities tell myths that explain why the worldview is the way the worldview is. And these myths will be about Homer, in the case of the Iliad and the Odyssey, who's the culture hero, who is imagined as the shall we say, encoder of everything that we admire about Greek civilization. That's quite a task for a culture hero, isn't it? And in these lives of Homer, it's very clear that people like Homer better than Hesiod, or at least in one of these myths. And so even though technically the medium of Homer is the epic, which is, may I say it this way, meant to glorify kings, nevertheless, if it comes to a contest between Hesiod and Homer, the more royalist of the two is Hesiod and not Homer. So yeah, it's still a medium of kings, but Calliope isn't actually named, is she? So she's kind of downplayed, isn't she? The kingliness is downplayed. And when you think of who is the most kingly of all characters in the Iliad, Agamemnon, I bet most of you, dear participants, already have taken a dislike to Agamemnon, and he's the kingliest of them all. So is this epic really a celebration of might makes right? Yes and no. Right now, I'm thinking more of the no aspect, not the yes aspect.
Janet.
R1, you mentioned hero is part of the group. So the group aspect of this epic coming into the focus on Rhapsody 2. Now we have calling all the heroes by name and by demos. For that reason, are we mentioning other muses to come into the picture and celebrate the community of muses together?
Yes, I think so. And there are traditions where there are only 3 muses. Homeric poetry never says how many there are. Only in Hesiodic poetry do we hear that there are 9. And in other sources, we hear that there are 3. And that particular version, I like even more because each of the 3 muses has a very specific name. And again, the name in each case means something. So there's mneme, that means memory or memorization, if you like. There is melethe, which means practice, as in practice makes perfect, as in rehearsal. And then aoide, which means song, which is the execution of neme, melete, and then aoide. So memory, practice, execution of the song. And yes, there's something very holistic about trying not to think about just one muse, but if you spread the glory, so to speak, and think in terms of this mitosis of a plurality of muses, 9 or even 3, you get an idea of how all-embracing their function is. Here's another way to look at it. As we also know from Hesiodic poetry, the mother of the 9 muses is mnemosine personified. It's mnemonic art personified, remembering. It's remembering. That's another way to think of the muses, if you think of their mother. But
well, Greg, I know you had one extra goodie you wanted to share during this.
Yes, since we talked about lines of humor, could I share an essay? And I invite the participants. This is not for our program, but just as a hobby, if you would like to look at this essay, it's about the reception of Homeric poetry beyond his life and times. And I love this picture. If you could scroll down, and you'll give the link for it, right? There it is. So this is a painter of Croatian origins, and the caption actually tells you what the painting means. But there you see Homer strumming his lyre, his stringed instrument, and singing. And look who's listening to him with rapt attention. There's old Dante. He's really listening, isn't he? And looking. And then there's a middle-aged Shakespeare off to our right, and then kind of maybe not as interested as he should be, a youngish Goethe to the left as we look at them, to the left of Shakespeare. And so in a way, that's the reception of Homeric poetry and world literature, isn't it? If you try to think of the continuities. But I like the way that Homer is pretty uncompromising, isn't he? He's not saying, read my book, because there is no book. It is, and it's not read my scrolls or read the writings that are on papyrus. It's listen to me and look at me. And so what kind of a lesson is that for world literature? And I'm happy to tell you that in 5th century Athens, people did think of Homer as performing, not writing down. And that's what this essay is about. So please don't feel obliged to read my essay because it goes on and on and on. But the picture tells you everything, doesn't it?
Thanks, Greg. That's just another tantalizing little bit for all of you in case you don't have enough reading at this point.
But you have plenty. And so don't let me distract you from the struggle, and the struggle is worth it. And just don't give up. If you start feeling discouraged, oh, like the catalog of ships, that's just too many details. Can you recommend some book to me about Greek mythology? I say, no. This is the book, so to speak, or better, this is the performance of Homer. And it's a very forgiving medium. If you don't get it the first time, you'll have repetitions, and you'll have more repetitions. And believe me, if you just stick with it, I guarantee you'll get it. You'll get it.
Thank you, Greg and Janet and Elan. Look forward to talking with you next week about more of these things. All right. Bye now.